Ons wil net vir Philip ook dankie sê, Philip Rosser wat ingewillig het om vir ons bietjie op datum te bring met sy vordering met die restaurasie van sy 16 Ranneberg. Baie dankie Philip. Uh and it's going to be over to you Philip. As jy reg is vir ons, dan kan jy maar begin.
Dankie Kobus. Ja, ek sal nou my share screen aansit, of terwyl ek dit doen, gaan ek so lank net vir julle sê, ek gaan my storie so bietjie verhaal. Dit kom so bietjie verder as net die 1916 wat ek nou mee besig is. En ek hoop dat Philip sal baie van die ervarings wat ek toe gaan deel met julle ook onthou en bewus wees van al die ervarings wat ons saam gehad het. Right. Ek gaan maar wat in Engels praat, dit is maar my taal, so at least I've got Viv and Brian to back me up for speaking in English tonight. About in 2005, Philip Kuschke introduced me to the Model T world. And as many of you know, once you get involved with these cars, it's a serious disease which you don't get rid of. He taught me to drive his 1911 on a Milligan run in 2005, I think it was. And the result was I want one. And the first one that I decided to build was a 1926, which I purchased the bulk of the project from Philip, who wanted to build the 1915. And I've always had a bit of a dream after that I would like to have a brass car. And the earlier brass cars are just so much more difficult to restore and more expensive. And I simply just can't afford to buy a restored car, so I have to do it myself. And what happened is that I decided to go for the 1916 for two reasons. The one is that's the last brass that was produced. And the second reason was it's a decade later than my 1926, or a decade earlier than my 1926. Now, just as a matter of interest, the 15, which is the left-hand one, is Philip Kuschke's 15, and the 16 are virtually identical cars. So there's not much in it in terms of the difference. And as you can possibly see from these two pictures, the only obvious difference, other than the wire wheel spokes that Philip has got on his car, looking at the wooden wheels, the headlight trimmings are brass on the 15 and black on the 16. And so too the side lights, the oil lamps on the side, the trimmings are also brass on the 15 and black on the 16. And more or less, other than that, the cars are identical. So it's basically, I wouldn't say easy to get hold of the parts, and it's been quite difficult to get hold of some of the parts. But the reason for me fetching the story way back from 2005 is basically clear from these following pictures that I'm going to show you, and this Philip will recall as well. This was our first outing that we went on parts hunting, coming back with a pile of parts that we managed to purchase in Carnarvon in 2005. And at that point, because I was building going for the 1926 and Philip was building his 1915, I tended to end up with the later parts, and Philip ended up, unfortunately, looking back now, unfortunately, he scored all the early parts and I scored the later parts. But together we did quite a number of trips. Carnarvon 2005, Klerksdorp 2005, coming back. And in a lot of these cases, when you get to somebody, excuse me, that's got parts available, it's a situation of you either take everything or you get nothing. So sometimes you end up with a lot of unusable parts as well. 2006 Queenstown. This is where Philip also purchased his 1923, which is sort of just sticking out in the left-hand corner of the picture there. And pardon the beverages, but the guy that we visited where we went to fetch this stuff was hooked on that specific beverage. So we had no option but to share. But came back with a reasonable amount of spares as well, a mixed bag. 2008, we visited the R, came back with a whole lot of spares, and once again we shared the costs and the early stuff and the later stuff. Following that was Carletonville, 2011, and that is also where I purchased a Chev, and Mike also, I think, purchased a Goggelmobile from the same people that we visited there. 2012, we visited Hanover. We got quite a nice collection of stuff there, and the late Higu Lodder joined us on that trip. That was one of his first trips that he did when he started building a car as well. And following that, the Edenvale trip in 2016 was my own trip, where I purchased this package simply to buy 2 rear original steel mudguards for my 26, which I couldn't find anywhere. So I ended up having to buy this entire package just to buy 2 mudguards, but managed to sell off a lot of the spares to various people and helped some people with spares. This package, by the way, came from Zimbabwe as well. The next one in 2017 was a combined effort between Okkert, Van der Berg, Philip, and Kushka and myself from Bolo, which was quite a large haul. And obviously, as you can see, it was quite a significant amount of parts that we purchased there. And the problem always with these parts, as some of you will know, is if you can get hold of the stuff, where do you go with it? Where do you store it? And that's always been a problem for many people, is to find space to store the parts that you accumulate. 2017, I managed to buy my 1927 pickup, and at the same time also managed to buy from the late Paul Fuchs estate, from his widowed daughter and his widowed wife, the car and these spares. And I think that was the last of the bunch of trips that we basically went on to try and get hold of some spares. By this time, I was already working on my 16, albeit at a very slow pace. And that's basically where it started, as all cars probably do, from a chassis upwards. Chassis was completed, and then things stood still for quite a long time. And then once again, I got further into the car, rebuilding the diff. And in this case, I also had to import quite a lot of parts. I think when you do an engine and a diff, it's not a good idea to use parts that are too badly worn. So typically on a differential, you may be able to reuse the inner bearings, but the outer bearings and the sleeves are best replaced, even though I replaced them with 2 inner bearings, because I prefer to use the original Hyatt type bearings and not the modern replacement bearings. I didn't think of putting a photograph in there, but as some of you will know, the early or the original bearings have got like a spiral wound material that it's manufactured from, which gives you a groove, which gives you a significantly better grease distribution in the bearing, versus the new bearings, which are simply a solid roller. And you find a lot of people are complaining they don't last as long simply because the grease distribution is not so good on the wooden replacement ones. And they don't come cheap. The last I checked, the price was, you're looking at about $75 to $85 for a bearing, which is quite expensive. So what one often does with the bearings is, if you can get good quality the two inner bearings, they tend to take much less wear and strain. And if you measure them up, you can get away with using them on the outside and getting some more bearings, as we often do with the packages and the amount of spares that you buy. You find some good bearings in there. Unfortunately, the outer sleeves take a lot of hammering, and those you generally have to replace. And once again, also at about $70 for a sleeve, they become quite expensive. From the diff, the suspension, the wheels came on. These wheels, incidentally, I took over from Philip when he put his wire wheels onto his 15. So that saved me the process of having to make wheels. And I obviously was able to buy that from Philip and just had to import some tires. And we managed to bring a whole bunch of tires in. I think it was in 2019 that we clubbed a whole bunch of people. I think we bought about 50 tires between the bunch that came in via Cape Town. And I've still got one or two tires of that consignment that left that I'm still using. Then came the engine, which I started on. Once again, the early parts are, as you can see in this picture, this oil pan was in quite bad shape. Hunting around, I managed to find one in a little bit better shape, but quite often what one would do is to simply cut especially because of the narrow front end of the oil pan, which is unique to the earlier cars. You often find the earlier ones very badly rusted in the transmission area, and simply you can save it by cutting it off just beyond the dipper's pan, and then weld a later model onto that, and still retain the narrow or the narrow front end on the oil pan. But I managed to find one in a reasonable shape, which I was able to restore. Following that came the bearings, which I did myself. The pouring obviously had some exposure when Philip did his and borrowed his molds to do the pouring with. We bought the white metal, shared that between the two of us, and I had the machining done at a local engineering place here, Barney's in George, which have now done quite a number of Model T engines between a whole bunch of people that are sending their stuff here. These guys are doing a reasonably good job because they've been working on quite a number of engines. In this case, I had to re-pour two or so of the conrods more than once, because they would only be able to center the conrod after I'd poured it, and they obviously can't keep the equipment set up from the beginning, so they tend to get slightly off center and go through the casting, and then you have to recast and hope for the best on the next one, which makes it better if you can do the machining yourself. You can set up your lathe on an uncast conrod, and then you've got your center correctly set up for cutting it once it's been cast, and don't cut it offset or off center. The main bearings, I didn't have the equipment or the knowledge to do so. That was done for me by Kevin Casey in Free State. He did the main bearings for me. New set of pistons and rings, aluminium pistons. I sleeved it back to standard. So that was the way to go at that point. And then once again, the cylinder head I wanted to put a low cylinder head on, which was also typical for the 15 and 16 model years. And I managed to obtain a cylinder head from Johan Maritz in Pretoria. And when I had it pressure tested here, those white markings are the cracks that were open on the cylinder head. And I spoke to the engineering guys here, Barney's, and said, you know, well, what do we do in this case? And a couple of guys have tried welding and stitching, which hasn't always been all that successful. And Barney's recommended a product that I use. And unfortunately, the guy that I dealt with has left the company now, and I haven't had an opportunity to find out what it was called because I don't recall. But it was a red-colored liquid, and I think it was a lead-based liquid that you basically pour into a running engine and drive it hot, basically. So the only option I had at this point was to set up a circulation system, and I managed to maintain the heat using a Kodak gas cylinder and an acetylene torch for about, I think it was 6 hours that I had to keep the heat at a certain temperature. And I managed to seem to have got the crack sorted. I haven't driven the car yet. I've started the engine. And after this, I had it pressure tested again, and it showed up fine. So I'm hoping that it's going to last. Basically, it was quite an expensive exercise. The product is in the order of about 600 Rand for a half a litre. So I'm hoping that that repair was successful. Following that, assembly of the engine itself, the crank in position, shimming up and making sure everything is in place, camshaft. And what I did is, I think many of the guys are doing that lately, is to have a hole drilled through the end of the rear end of the camshaft that you can put a pin through it. And then I basically made up a bushing which you can position in the block, and then the pin runs against the bushing. There's typically a washer between the bushing and the pin as well, the roll pin. And by using that bushing in the correct position, you can set your end plate quite easily on the camshaft. What I did I was reluctant to drill a hole through the camshaft in my 26 when I restored that engine. So I ended up with a severe, after the car had run for a while, with a severe end play on the camshaft, which caused quite a knock. And the only way I was able to get rid of that was to basically shim up or put in a set of washers on the front end of the camshaft, which is a clumsy way of doing it. And it's very difficult because as soon as you take off the timing cover, these washers fall out, and it's quite difficult to get them in position and get the right number and thickness of these washers to shim it up. So doing it on the rear end of the camshaft to set it up so that you can set the end plays is simply an easier way of getting your end play sorted out. Following that came the transmission and the magneto. Once again, doing magnetizing the magnets when they disassembled out of the magneto is quite a bit easier than to do it on the magneto. It's simply just you can set up your magnetizing device in a vise, and then you just hold the magnets, and as soon as you power that up, it actually draws the magnet out of your hand onto the device, which and you repeat that 2, 3, 4 times, and you're on your way. Then you obviously just need to make sure you install the magnets in the right sequence. What I also did is there's been some recommendation of making sure you balance your engine components and transmission components. And once again, when I restored my 1926, I didn't do that. And the car had been running for quite a number of years already. Between Philip Kushka and myself, we normally do the same trips with his 15 and my 1926. And together we've covered roughly about, both of us, about roughly 30,000 kilometers over the years since when was it 29, 28 that we started driving with the cars. And I had an engine problem at some stage, and I took the engine apart and on the 26, and then I decided to have the engine components balanced here by somebody in Mossel Bay. And after assembling it, I'm convinced I've got more vibration than I had before the time. So I'm not a pure believer of the balancing unless it's probably done better than mine was done. So I attempted to do the balancing myself on a blade edge that I got. I set that up with a high quality instrument level, and to get the two blades parallel and level. And I managed to balance most of the components, the heavier stuff, which is the important ones, with very little correction that I needed to do on the parts. And so I'm also, once again, haven't driven the car yet, so I'm hoping that balance will be sufficient. From there, basically the transmission assembly. And one thing, I take a lot of photographs whenever I assemble the engine, or anything for that matter. Looking back, once you've closed something up and you start second guessing yourself, did you put a split pin in there? Did you wire up these bolts? So that helps with the evidence that when you start second guessing, that you can at least be confident that you've put the wires in and the split pins where they belong. And if you look on the right-hand photograph, you will see the bearings, the wheel bearings in the background of that photograph that I was talking about, and you can see the grooves on those bearings itself, which is what makes them better than the replacement ones, which I spoke about a little earlier. Second part of the magneto was the ring coil, which I also redid. It's not a difficult job to do. It's fairly easy to do it, but it's extremely time consuming. Starting off with, that's the magneto, ring that I had, and I had more than one, so I was able to get hold of some required coils, which was missing on this one. Sandblasted the ring in my little homemade cage, stripped the whole thing down into bits and pieces, cleaned up the ribbons, the coil ribbons, and then rewound them. Also, obviously, 8 in one direction, 8 in the other direction, and then assembled the coil, the magneto ring. And then basically that goes onto the engine block again, and the photographs once again showing me that I've got my wires in. And for those people that don't know, this funnel, which is now, the engine's obviously upside down at this point, the 1926 and 27 models have got an enlarged funnel in comparison to the earlier models, which is about 1/3 of this size, which is the system that takes the oil, the splashed oil from your magneto area, and feeds that to the front main bearing. And for obvious reasons, you can see how easy it is for the fluff from the transmission to get caught in that funnel, which is smaller in the earlier models than the later models, to cause a blockage. And that's why an external oil line is quite important. So what I did with my 1916 is I actually soldered the larger funnel onto the oil pipe. So that's theoretically not correct for the 1916, but I wanted to ensure that I get more oil from the inside of the engine, and so I used the later model oil funnel. So if ever you work on your engine, that's something worth considering as well. As slowly engine taking shape, transmission attached, pistons are in, valves set up. Once again, I used adjustable valve lifters, simply just that it's easier to adjust your valves rather than having to grind down the stems and hoping you don't take off too much on your valve stem, and then you have to start from scratch again. Engine getting shape there. And one of the things that's probably the next step was basically closing the engine up. And I think one of the issues that is always for anybody restoring an engine is basically that first run. And hopefully I can get mine to run to show you here, which is gives you a lot of satisfaction when that engine is running. Let's wait for the video to load. The video that I had was simply just starting the engine in a stand. I think what was clear in that as well is that my wife was holding onto the one side of the stand from it moving around. And I think we're fortunate that I'm assuming that most of us, and Philip Kushka's got the same situation, that our wives are always there to give us a hand when we need and pick up some oily hands and etc. Engine started quite easily and ran quite nicely for a while without water, only just the radiator on there. Engine basically into the chassis. Then I put the fan on. The left-hand side is the pulley that I had, which was the original brass pulley of the bottom one of the two, but it was in such a bad shape, so I decided to make a new one up myself. I used aluminium, and I bought new fan blades and assembled that. I think the aluminium, the advantage of the aluminium fan pulley is that I could use modern bearings in that, rather than the original bushings. There's the engine in the chassis. Firewall in steering is on, and it's starting to take shape, looking a little bit more like a car now. Then came the bodywork. Now, body parts are always a problem with restoring a car the way that we do, and I think this is probably the most stupid way to restore a car, is to try and build a car up from bits and pieces, because nothing fits. Very little body parts are available. It's a totally different story for buying a complete car, stripping it down and restoring it, and then building that up again. So you'll see that the top left-hand side, the two mudguards have got 4 rivet holes, which is not correct for a 16. That's basically a 14 or earlier mudguards, and they didn't look too hot either. And on closer inspection, I found that they were actually remanufactured. They weren't original mudguards in any case. So I was back to square one, and I got somebody to make up some new mudguards for me from scratch. The bottom one in the photograph is the rear mudguards, which is the later 16 version, which has got the crowned mudguard. And I wanted the earlier 16, which has got a flat mudguard. So the same guy replaced this inner section for me with a flat sheet metal. And then the turtle deck, I couldn't find one in South Africa at all. So I decided I managed to find this one in the US, and I imported that. In retrospect, at least it's an original one, but in retrospect, it cost so much money to get this thing fixed up, and it took so much work to get it sorted out. I think I would have been better off having one made up locally from scratch, rather than to repair. I've got some photographs a little later on, which you can see what that looked like. The turtle deck, the base I started off with, I had that sheet metal bent and shaped according to the wood. And when I fitted that onto the wood frame, I had to do quite a bit of knocking and gentle persuasion to get it in position. And then I wanted to take it off because it needed to be welded on the corners, and I obviously wanted to paint it. And I simply couldn't get it off the wood again, so it had to stay. And I had to fix that up on the wood. So one day, if I need to take that off, I'll have to try and sort that problem out, or cross that bridge when I get to it, if I ever need to do that. Basically, the quarter panels there are also remanufactured. There's the 2 rear mudguards with the correct flat surfaced inners installed. Front mudguards, a little bit more difficult. Started off with a cardboard template to get the angles and the shapes right. And from that point, the guy that helped me make these in Great Back River, from the flat sheet metal, we cut the shapes out, and he didn't have a shrinking or a stretching tool, so he did all the bending of the sheet metal. As you can see on the right-hand side, that curved right-angled piece was beaten and stretched with a hammer and a dolly. It obviously took quite a lot of time to do that. From that point, the front little quarter panels, those I've made myself. Even though doing the wood frame was a challenge for me, being a scientist and not mechanically with a mechanical background. I took a lot of strain with the woodwork, but when I got to these sheet metal quarter panels, the woodwork was a breeze, because that was even more difficult to make than the wood. because these things are shaped, they've got like an S-curve at the top and less of an S-curve at the bottom. So getting those shapes right is not so easy because you have to stretch and shrink the metal quite a bit. From there on, doors, I had some reasonably good doors, but the one door didn't fit properly when we fitted it into the setup on the body. So we had to take the skin off and do a modification to the woodwork. As you can see on the right-hand side, we had to add a small piece on the inside of the door and remove that on the outside of the door and basically get the angle of the door different on the one corner to fit properly. So that was quite a challenge to get that sorted out. But at the end of the day, the door fitted quite nicely. The car's taking more and more shape. Front end in place with the hood former and the cowl. Back to the turtle deck again, the one that I imported, the shape, possibly my seat back, even though it was built according to the plans, the angle of the seat back versus the angle of the front end of the turtle deck were different, and it had a very bad fit there. So that bead had to be moved on the turtle deck to get, as on the right hand side, to get a better fit, so that it just looks tidier and better. But once again, it took an enormous amount of work. The turtle deck also was, once it was sandblasted, it was so thin, there were a lot of holes that appeared at that point, and a couple of tears and a couple of .22 fire shot holes that had to be welded closed. So all in all, as I said, it may have been a better option to make one up from scratch. But in the end of the day, I basically brought that back into my own garage and put all the parts just in place to see what it looks like. And at this point, I'm in a situation where I'm basically working on the body, sanding and filling and priming. So the next step now is simply to let me stop sharing here. That's all that I've got on this PowerPoint. So the next step now is basically to get all the spray painting and that sorted. Then I need to look at prepping, all the prepping for the painting. I would like to attempt spraying the car myself. It's going to be an outside job, but I want to attempt that myself. I've got a good radiator, which is also there, ready to be fitted. And then I need to, from a couple of bits and pieces, I need to manufacture some hood bows, and I think then comes the upholstery and the hood itself. So that's the next set. I was hoping to have the car finished for February, that we can drive to Cape Town, our regular Cape Town trip with that. But I've had a couple of big operations recently, so that set me back a few months. So I'm most likely not going to make my deadline, but I would like to give it a go and see if I can get the car completed by beginning of next year at least. And that's my bit. I don't know if anybody got any questions.
Baie dankie, Philip. Enige vrae daar, Philip?
Philip, ek wil jou graag vra, hoeveel papwiele het jy al gehad met die kar?
Ek het al 'n papwiel gehad terwyl hy so staan. Ek moet maar kort die bande bietjie pomp, en eendag toe ek een van die bande pomp, toe wil hy nie pomp nie, toe blaas die lug maar net hier langs die valve uit, en ek het die band afgehaal, en die binneband dit lyk my dit is maar oor die algemene swak plek is. Die binnebande het almal sulke ribbe wat hy waar die ronding is. Het hy sulke gepaste riwe wat so aan mekaar gefuse is, gesmelt is of wat ook al. En hy het eenvoudig net oopgebars op een van daai nate. En ek het dit al op my 26 op presies dieselfde plek op die binneband, het ook al 'n binneband gekry wat daar eenvoudig net losgegaan het en pap geword het. So dit was nou nogal vreemd om mekaar te hê, want ek nog nie 100 meter mee gery het of iets eers nie, en ek het al 'n papwiel gehad.
Philip, nog enige iemand daar vir vrae vir Philip? Ek dink as 'n ou so na kyk na wat Philip vir ons gewys het, kan 'n ou maar net sê, well done. Ek sê, dis daarom 'n enorme taak om mekaar so van niks af. Ek weet daar's ander ouens wat dit ook gedoen het, maar om mekaar so uit niks, uit parte uit en uit scraps uit op te bou is dit wil gedoen word.
Ek sê, dit is maar die domste manier om 'n restaurasie te probeer doen.
Ja,
Maar ek dink jy kry die meeste satisfaksie daaruit aan die einde van die dag.
Stef, jy daar, wat sê jy van hierdie manne wat sulke take aanpak?
Nee, yes, dis besonder so. Dis besonder.
Ja, nee, ek moet bietjie guts hê.
Ja, nee, definitief.
Nog iemand enige vrae?
Philip het nou wel gesê, dis die dom manier van doen, om mekaar so op te bou. Maar ek glo dat dit die bevredigendste manier is om mekaar op te bou.
Baie beslis.
Yes.
Daar is nie 'n gevoel wat jy kan beskryf as dit wat jy gedoen het, ewe skielik sien jy maar daar staan die kar. Of toe Philip daai engine vir die eerste keer in die lewe geroep het. Ek meen, daai gevoel wat jy beleef is net, dis 'n magiese gevoel.
Ja, Philip, jy kan seker so 'n bietjie uitbrei oor daai gevoel wat jy vandag ervaar het weer, né?
Ja, seker.
Vertel bietjie vir ons vandag, Philip.
Ja, nee, ek het my Speedster se engine seker so 'n bietjie meer as 'n week terug het Philip my gehelp en ons het die ding gestart en hoe alle verwagting in het hy redelik gou het hy gevat. As Philip nie die afskakelaartjie aangesit het vroeër nie, kon die engine nog vroeër gestart het. Maar hy het verbasend gou gevat, mooi gehardloop alles. Maar soos julle weet het ek 'n oliedruk sisteem en ek kry nie oliedruk nie. Die drukmeter registreer nie. So ek het nou 'n week gevat en Philip was seker elke dag vir 'n uur of 2 hier om my 'n hand te gee en ek kry net nie die oliedruk reg. En maar nou weer eens, Kevin het vir my 'n week terug gesê, gooi olie. Jy weet, as Kevin praat dan partykeer voel ek soos 'n aapie, want Kevin praat te slim vir my, maar in elk geval. Toe sê hy, maar gooi olie in 'n brandblusser en sit die brandblusser onder druk en spuit die stelsel weer die olie in. En toe vanoggend het ek dit nou gedoen en sien daar, toe Philip en ek weer die engine aan die gang kry, toe hardloop daai oliedruk verstommend hoog. So ja, ek is baie dankbaar.
Ja, maar geluk daarmee ook. Net om dan reg gekry.
Toe ek nou daai engine, ek het 'n staander by Philip geleen, en die engine daar aangesit om hom aan die gang te kry. Ek het hom nou geslinger, nou ek sal dit nie nou meer kan doen na my skoueroperasie nie, maar hy's baie styf nog gewees, maar ek het hom redelik maklik aan die gang gekry, alhoewel ek het 'n aansitter ingebou in die kar in, juis omdat my skouers besig was om op te pak, so ek wil graag die kar kan gebruik en nie net sy vertoonstuk gebruik nie. So ek ongelukkig is 'n aansitter iets wat jy nie kan wegsteek sommer nie, maar mense kan maar sê dis verkeerd vir 'n 16, maar ten minste sal ek my kar kan ry.
Ja.
Dit was maar ook 'n groot plesier toe ek hom nou eintlik aan die gang geslinger het ten minste vir die eerste keer dat ek sommer dadelik gevat het en mooi geloop het ook. En soos wat Philip sê, baie satisfaksie wat 'n ou daai uitkry.
Ja, so dankie Philip.
Philip,
Nog iemand enige vrae daar vir Philip?
Philip?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just watching what you're doing, having done the depot hack and having just done my mother-in-law runabout and both engines. The incredible feeling you get when they just start and run lekker, eh?
It's such a relief, when you do that. And I think the advantage of doing that startup in a separate stand, because what Philip has done is he's assembled this stand with a steel firewall, so that you've got a coil box that you can attach to it, so that the engine runs completely independently. You can either attach your radiator or run it without the radiator for that short period. But if there's something wrong, then you can simply just put the engine back in your engine stand and work on it, rather than having to take it out of the car. You put it in the car to start it, So it's quite useful to have an external starting stand, if you can call it that. Very, very useful to use something
I
like
never had a chance for that. I just did them both in the chassis, but somehow I got it right, thanks to a huge amount of telephone calls to a little guy in George. I think you know him. And he had an answer to everything. And he was never ever too impatient to just take time and figure things out. Thank you, Philip, the other Philip.
Yeah.
Pleasure, Bob.
That's what we're there for, is to help each other. It's important to get these cars on the road, and I think we're very fortunate with the two Philips that we live a kilometer apart. So we often, even just putting an inlet and outlet manifold onto a car, you need more than one set of hands, So it's quite convenient. Philip, just quickly come and give me a hand, or the other way around, And also, I think our wives are a very important role that they play in helping us out with our hobbies at this point,
Right.
I got to say, we've got this guy called Courier Guy, and he brings stuff from Philip to Cape Town very quickly. So right at the moment, I'm doing hood frames. I've just laminated the third one on Philip's steel mold, and now Courier Guy will bring it back again. So yeah, you guys are something else. Just remember that.
Dankie. Is daar nog iemand enige vrae daar vir Philip?